I'm really glad to welcome all of you into this space tonight and really happy to be here. I'm feeling at peace with being here with all of you tonight, and I'm feeling hopeful for a good conversation. So just want to welcome you all again. Thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to sharing this space and engaging with you for the next hour. And my intention tonight is really to help everyone here and everyone, listening and showing up to really make connections um, about things you may not know and things you may already know when thinking about or as it relates to managing change and transition. So, as the title states, how to care for yourself in times of change and transition. So we're going to be digging into that um, over the next hour, engaging hopefully in a conversation that you can, take some information from. One thing from all of you here, and as you're coming in and listening, I encourage you to get, if you don't already have one, get a pen and paper out. Get maybe if you have a Word document up on your computer, maybe the notes section on your phone, whatever works for you. But I encourage you to get out a pen and a paper. Sometimes you'll hear me call it a capture tool, just something to capture thoughts and things that are coming up things that are coming up for you on. And so as we're going through tonight, I'm going to ask you to get curious about some things that are coming up for you and to take some notes. So before we go ahead and get started, a few things to note. One at the end, and I'll remind all of you, we have a feedback form. If you could fill that out, it's also in the chat. It's helpful for us to know here at Attendees what you think, if we can, create relevant topics, and just get your feedback with how we're doing. To share a little bit more about that, this is a free monthly webinar that is brought to you as part of Eden's Counseling Group's regular monthly wellness series. So we welcome you. I also encourage you to check out our website, edenscounseling.com. There are some great previous sessions that are recorded and up on the site. This session is going to be recorded. So if you leave here kind of thinking about and some thoughts are brewing, feel free to come back to the website and go back over this. This will be, again, recorded and put on the site. And then you can also get updates about future wellness webinars on our website there as well. Again, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. I'm going to try to keep up with the chat as much as possible. And just a reminder, at the end of our time together, we are going to hold the end of the session for some Q&A if folks have questions. Happy to answer those in the chat and respond to you there. A little bit about me. So I want to share a little bit about who I am and, why am I speaking with all of you about this tonight? So my name is Margaret Mayer. I use pronouns she or they. I am a licensed master of social work and a certified Daring Way facilitator based on the work and research of Dr. Brene Brown. I have over 10 years experience as a social worker and a 10-year background in utilizing relational approaches. And what relational approaches are, it is approach to working with folks, kind of highlighting and recognizing that human beings, we're hardwired for connection, right? And with this, we are and have been impacted by the relationships we've been in, both in the past and the present. And so the degree to which we have been in connection or in disconnection with others really impacts us. And so this relational approach can be used when there is distress in relationships for people. And this can be interpersonal relationships, so the relationships we have with other people. It can be in family relationships. It can be used even in organizations or social relationships and social settings. And a really important way that it can be used is intrapersonally. So the relationship you have with yourself. And we are going to be talking a lot about tonight the relationship, the intra and the interpersonal relationships. So as we get started, in thinking about navigating change and transition, right? How to manage it, how to take care of yourself. Let's talk about what is a time of change and transition. So, in thinking about what is change and transition, well, change and transition can be a job or a career change. It can be conflict with a partner or family, a family member, death of a parent, loss of a friend, moving, right? Navigating a move, getting a pet, welcoming a new child, a child leaving home, a health diagnosis, spending a large amount of money unexpectedly. It's a big change on us and that bank account, creating a new budget, a major milestone birthday, accepting a necessary loss. So something that we have to let go of, something that we're losing. And so when I ask, this next item is what else? And so thinking about change and transition, I'm making up a story that tonight's session called you here for a reason, right? So I want you to use that pen and paper wherever you're taking notes and put down, what is going on for you right now? Are you in a time and change and transition? And if not, if you're here tonight and you're listening to this session in order to help you when you're going through change and transition, think about something in the past, something you've gone through in the past, right? And so write that down on your capture tool. Give you a second to think about what's coming up for you. What sort of called you to join in, be here, and write down your change, your transition. As you're thinking about it, as you're capturing it, let's dig in a little bit more. So when we think about how to take care of ourselves in times of change and transition, let's think about what we know. What kind of things can we start thinking about? Well, let's talk about why is it so hard to manage change and transition? What makes change or transition hard to manage? Feel free to drop your ideas or thoughts in the chat and feel free to take notes. Again, what is coming up for you, especially related to that change that you captured? What makes it hard to manage? Start thinking about what you know about that. We also want to think about what does work during these times and what doesn't work. So this means really thinking about what is supportive during these times? What is supportive to us in our well-being and being able to manage the change? What do we know works and what do we know doesn't work? Right? Oh yeah, and I'm reading some thoughts of folks in the chat. Is that the unknown makes it hard to manage? Absolutely. It's new ground and requires lots of new learning. It requires us to adapt and bend and change really quickly sometimes or unexpectedly. So when we think about what works and what doesn't work, when we think about what is supportive, sort of in other words, it makes me think about, right, if I'm going through a job change, let's say, it can be really helpful to regulate the stress and my mood, to schedule times to apply for a job and to take breaks. So I can manage that. That is helpful. I'm looking for a job. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel uncertain, but I can schedule out some time in my day to really work on that. If I'm mourning the loss of a pet, that same approach isn't likely going to work, right? So what is helpful and what is not? What has been working for you when managing change and transition? And what has not been working? Going a little bit further into this, and this is a really important piece, is oftentimes when we start thinking about what's working and what's not, it's really easy to have more ideas of what isn't working. To really be able to recognize in change and transition, we're sort of confronted with barriers and what doesn't work. what makes it hard is easier to identify oftentimes. Uh, and what is, excuse me, what makes it hard to, it's easier to identify and what doesn't work rather than what is helping us in the change, which is why we often become overwhelmed and uncertain and really stressed out during these times. In this, we also often feel like we're going at it alone. It can be really hard to think of what to do or what needs to change, and it starts to feel really personal. It starts to feel like something is wrong with us. And we end up often using negative coping skills or reprimanding ourselves for not being successful. And this is something that I see and hear a lot and work with people. This negative reinforcement we're trying to use to address our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And that doesn't always work. It doesn't always work in allowing us to really address the issue in meaningful ways. And so because it's not working, we often shut down, we sort of shut out, we isolate ourselves, we don't see our friends and our community, and we can get really lost in the hurtful feelings that really perpetuate the uncertainty and the instability and change. And so a lot of us maybe get on our phones and start scrolling, we find ways to disconnect, and all of this really perpetuates the overwhelming feelings and the fatigue that come with change. So we want to really talk about that tonight. We want to help share some information to really help us kind of stabilize and understand, right? So what are some common experiences? What exactly happens during times and change and transition? Some common experiences include symptoms of change and transition, the impact on your body, and what we move away from. So when we're talking about this, to help really think about how do we get to clarity of mind and understand what's happening to us, we're going to build out more on this together. We're going to build out on symptoms of change and transition. We're going to think about the impact on our bodies. And then we're going to talk about what we move away from. And so this is kind of information gathering, data gathering of what we do and what we may experience. And then we're going to shift into how to help ourselves with the change and transition, how to cope, right? And how to manage this. So we have to start with symptoms. And so when we say symptoms, this really means what is the symptomology? What are the feelings and the experiences that we have while going through change? And so the most common, what we know through the data and the research in relationship to sort of human behavior and how we respond during these times, is that we often feel stress, overwhelm, anxiety, worry, avoidance, dread, fear, vulnerability, and excitement. So this stress word is in bold because stress often accompanies these other feelings, or these other feelings accompany stress, and stress is sort of the primary indicator, primary symptom when we're going through a change and transition. And speaking to stress, sort of defining it, is stress is what we experience when there's an environmental demand as that we see as beyond our ability to cope with successfully. So something happens and we have a physiological or a psychological, so a brain or body response to the event, and we feel unable to cope adequately. What increases stress, and so some of this was mentioned by folks earlier, is unpredictability, uncontrollability, or when we feel really overloaded, when it's just coming on too strong, too fast. As a result of this, it can be that overwhelm feeling. The overwhelm is just experiencing extreme levels of stress to the point of not being able to function. This also can bring up anxiety. And so anxiety is really an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes in our body, like the increase of blood pressure. It's important when we talk about anxiety to differentiate between anxiety as a state and a trait. And so what that means is a state of being. I am feeling anxiety as a response to this situation. I recently got fired. I recently lost someone close to me, and I am feeling anxiety as a result of this situation. Anxiety is a trait. Some of us are more naturally predisposed to feeling anxious. So some of us have more anxiety, and while that is true, certain states can increase the anxiety. Certain situations can increase that. Often during these times, we experience worry, and worry is just that negative chain of thoughts about bad things that may happen in the future. So the change happens, we become worried, we sort of get stuck on this chain of negative things that may happen as a result of the change. Something that's really important about worry is it's not an emotion. Worried isn't an emotion, it rather indicates our thought patterns, those worried thoughts. I don't know if you're anything like me, but this avoidance one hits me pretty hard. This avoidance is kind of not showing up or doing something that I need to do because of how I'm feeling, and spending lots of time sort of dodging or moving away from things that already feel as if they're consuming us. It's also a coping strategy of anxiety. We move into avoidance. And avoidance can be really hurtful because it can be hurtful to ourselves and to other people when we need to show up, we need to do things, we need to get things done, and we just don't feel able to do it. Dread, and so this is frequently experienced in response to high probability negative situations. So we think that a situation is going to be really bad. It has a high probability of not working out well for us or not in our favor. And so we really dread the event. And typically it can often make the actual event worse than what it was or what it is. There's also fear. So fear is usually shorter lasting, but it's a high alert emotion in response to a perceived threat. And like anxiety, fear can be measured as a state or trait. Some of us are more often afraid or feel that, quickly respond to physical or psychological danger. And some of us are, we don't have the experience of fear as much until a situation happens. And so it's a state of being rather than a trait. Vulnerability is the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. This is a really important one for me and working with folks during times of change and transition, because we often hear a lot about vulnerability, and it can be also used or thought about really positively, right? I'm going to show up and be vulnerable in this situation to create a deeper connection with someone I love and care about. That same emotion can be experienced in times of change and transition where we're just, again, it's uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure when we're uncertain about a situation. So some things that come up are starting a new business feels very vulnerable. Dating after a divorce, trying to get pregnant after a miscarriage, sending a kid off to college. All of these things create the emotional response, and we're feeling very vulnerable. And then excitement. Excitement is defined as an energized state of enthusiasm leading up to an enjoyable event. And, I kind of name, why is this important for us to talk about? And it's important because it often feels very similar to anxiety. It's that similar to like coming out of your skin feeling. Something's about to happen. There's a lot of energy around it. And it's important when feeling, it's important to name, because when we're feeling the excitement, we can also be feeling anxiety. And it's helpful to slow down and get really introspective and really curious about what feeling is really coming up for us in order to best address it. And so some ways that excitement shows up in change and transition are things like I'm excited to start something new or change my job, or maybe I am really excited to go on a first date after a breakup. or stand up for myself in a tough situation. And I've been practicing, what I'm going to say or how I'm going to advocate for myself. And I'm excited to do that. Or, you know, maybe I'm in starting college and really excited about getting up in front of the room in my English program and reading my first piece of work. It can be really exciting, but it can also feel a lot, there's a lot of other feelings that come with it. So as we're talking about these and as I'm sharing more about, what exactly they are, I want you all to think about what symptoms come up for you when you're going through change or transition. What do you feel and what do you experience? And write them down. Write them down next to that change or transition you captured at the beginning of our session together. What symptoms come up for you? It's just a good way to help you name and understand what you're feeling and experiencing. So, what is the impact that these symptoms have on our body? Well, as I mentioned, stress is a symptom that typically accompanies change and transition. And in and of itself, it's also accompanied by a number of secondary signs and symptoms. It's the most common that's present during change and transition. And so we really need to pay attention to what it does to our body and the impact on our body. It creates things like high blood pressure. How many of you, like me, you feel really stressed out and you can feel that blood pressure rising? Or maybe you're stressed out, going to the doctor even, and your blood pressure is higher than normal. Oftentimes, this stress response on our body makes it hard to get sleep. We have weight loss or gain, headaches, body and muscle aches, stomach aches, right? These gastro issues, these gut issues. So it's really hard. It's really hard to really manage stress because it can be so physiological and psychological. And so I want to sort of invite you all right now, even as we're talking about, as I'm naming the impact on the body, what's going on in your body right now? What's happening for you? What are you feeling? We've been talking a little bit about symptoms, naming what may come up. Hopefully you've been thinking about and working to make connections with the symptoms you've experienced in times of change and transition for you. And so I'm just inviting you all back into your body, paying attention to what you're feeling and what's coming up, and creating and sort of modeling this practice of taking time to really pay attention. Taking big, deep breaths, listening to our body, understanding how our body's responding to what we're feeling is really important and is an important part of understanding what's happening for us when we're going through a lot. So we have these symptoms and we experience the impact of stress on our bodies. We now need to understand, what do we move away from, right? What are we moving away from? And this is often connections. We often move away from connection when we are going through change and transition and we're feeling really overwhelmed by it, struggling to manage it a little bit. And this speaks to that experience of feeling sometimes like we're going at it alone. The mere fact of talking to someone about what's going on can feel like a lot to manage. In reality, we need those connections, but it can be hard to reach out for them. And so we move away from connections. And what we know about connections are connections move us towards what we call 5 good things. And the 5 good things are zest, clarity, worth, productivity, and then the desire for more connection. And so it's really hard because this is compounded, when we think about connections, And what helps us engage in deeper connections is the connection, but in change, we're sort of moving away and we end up being disconnected. And again, for each of you, kind of getting curious about what have you moved away from? Who have you moved away from when you've been going through a change or a transition? I know that something that often comes up for me personally, for me and work, is that there's also this piece of societal pressure and other people's expectations. And so what I mean by this is thinking about, have you ever gone through some sort of change or transition at the same time as someone else? Um, and so while you're going through the same change, you're recognizing that they might be dealing with it differently. And so this could be something like the loss of a loved one. Like, how did your siblings cope, or your spouse cope, or your kids cope? Um, Something else that comes up is, a lot of folks, especially if you're in the Houston area, lost their homes in Harvey. This was a huge change that people were, that happened for a lot of folks. And we were going through it all as a community. But how we dealt with the change to the same situation is often different than those that we're in it with. Most of us don't handle it in the same way. And so this is also a piece that moves us away from the connection. I was recently working with a client who had just gotten a new job. And he came in and he was saying, everyone's telling me I need to be excited. I should be really excited. I've been talking to you, been going through this change, been really struggling to find a new position. Finances are dwindling. It's really important for me to get a new job, and I got one. And everyone is just telling me that I need to be excited. And he said, Margaret, I'm not. The stakes still feel too high right now. There's still too much that needs to happen, and there's still a lot of pressure on me that it doesn't feel like it's worked out just yet. And I don't have the space to be excited. And so even in this situation, it was that reminder of, the people around him, the people that him not having a job was impacting, were feeling one way, and he was still feeling very different and needing some different support in managing what was coming up for him. So understanding this, understanding symptoms, how the symptoms of change and transition impact our thinking, our feeling, our body, what we move away from. Um, we want to connect this back. So, it kind of leaves us at the what now. Well, we want to connect this back to our whole self. And connecting this back to our whole selves in the sense of understanding what happens to all of the different parts of us during these times. And so thinking about your example, thinking about what you wrote down, I encourage you to get curious as we move through the next slide and thinking about physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual wellness. And what is our whole self feeling during these times? It can also feel a little bit overwhelming, 5 more things. I understand that. But what this does is it allows us to create these buckets, right? So kind of the buckets, physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual. We can create these buckets to take inventory of what's going on for us in these 5 areas while we're going through the change and transition. And then we can have a better understanding of what needs our attention most. It's sort of, like what I say is our ability to sort of triage a situation. And creating this outline of your whole self can really allow you more clarity in getting, again, from it big to it being bite size. I often say that with people. How do we make this bite size? What's going on? It feels really big. The stress of change can feel super overwhelming. Let's kind of get clear on what's happening, and then let's make it bite size so we know where to start. So for you, thinking about the situation that you wrote down, is there any area, and capture this, that needs your attention? It might need your attention the most. And so thinking about physical wellness are things like, am I moving my body? Am I exercising? Am I going to healthcare appointments? That one's really important. Also, am I taking my medications? eating regularly and nutritiously? Am I feeding my body what it needs? And also am I addressing somatic concerns? So those somatic concerns are those physical concerns. Am I addressing maybe the high blood pressure or the gut issues, right? And then we have mental wellness. And so this is the part of, am I challenging my brain? How am I taking care of my brain as a muscle, right? How are we flexing that mental muscle? Am I getting curious? Someone wrote in the chat earlier, they were coming in getting curious. That's practicing mental wellness, leaning into curiosity. Going on adventures, learning something new, thinking about what it means to create safe and secure environments for yourself is a part of mental wellness. Managing stress and establishing routines. So the establishing routines is really important because a routine can also help you get grounded and understanding, creating that ritual for yourself, creating a routine. I'm going to use the mornings to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to take care of myself. I can anticipate this. I know what's going to happen. I can be in control of this thing. Emotional wellness. Do I understand my feelings? Can I name and listen to them? Am I engaging in play and self-compassion? Have I identified my support systems? Am I addressing mindfulness or meditation? Do I have a care plan? Do I have a care plan for how I take care of myself? This is something that I often work with a lot of clients with is, what is your care plan, right? What is the plan that you have in place when you start really feeling impacted by going through this change? Your physical, mental, social, spiritual wellness might be impacted, but what's the care plan? And this looks different for different folks, right? There's no script for a care plan. This is based on individual needs of individual people. Then there's the social wellness. Do I visit and interact with friends and family? Am I getting out of the house? Do I have appointments? Do I have support groups? Are engaging in social activities? And it can be virtual or in person. Do I volunteer? Do I run in-person errands? This in-person errand is really important because it's just a low contact social experience. I can see and interact with people sort of low stakes. And then spiritual wellness. And so spiritual means different things to different people. It's a word that works for a lot of people and people can feel like they can attach to and leverage, and it doesn't for others. And all of the above is okay. Spiritual wellness and the way in which I'm speaking about it is, do I have a greater purpose, or do I feel connected to my inner purpose? And so this can look like going out in nature. It can be praying or meditating to some people. And it can be, am I prioritizing that clarity of mind, my connection to self and my connection to something outside of myself? So what next? Where do we go? How do we find clarity? One helpful tool is you can start with an assessment or take an inventory about your current state of being. If you signed up for this, you may have seen this in the sign up information, but at Eddins, we have a wellness inventory that you can take. It's called a self-care assessment, and it helps you evaluate these different parts of your whole self. I just put it in the chat. So this is a great place to start. Do an assessment, get an inventory of your current state of being. Challenge yourself to be really honest and open with yourself about how you're feeling and what's coming up for you. And then being able to recognize where and how do you want to tend to yourself in a different way, or to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Another part of this is understanding, and this can help you understand, where is your focus, right? What's keeping your attention? What part of your whole self is taking up the most space in your mind and in your thinking? And how are you able to then create opportunity for reflection on what keeps coming up as you're thinking about this focus? I have clients come in and we'll do what's called a what's troubling you list. This is very similar to the self-care assessment, but it's client driven. And so what's troubling you list is where they create sort of the same idea of those buckets of the different parts of their lives that they identify as important to them. And then they list what's troubling them in those areas, what's coming up. And this allows us to really have a place to start and looking at what's taking up a lot of space for you, what's taking up a lot of space for an individual. And sometimes just naming it can feel really empowering, really putting it on paper and naming, these are the things that are coming up for me. This is where my focus is. These things are happening over here, but my focus right now is in this part of my life. It gives a good place to put attention. And it gives a good place to really start. And as we're unpacking those things, as we're unpacking what is coming up and what's troubling, what's troubling someone in that change and transition, we can also understand what it's rooted in. And sometimes what it's rooted in, the root of that trouble is something completely different than maybe they thought in the beginning. But it's an opportunity for us to explore what's happening. What are we really experiencing in that trouble? And so this brings us to naming and addressing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And this is very important. And this is very powerful. It seems pretty self-explanatory, understanding thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And technically it is, right? Like our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors. But it's one of the hardest things for us as people to really slow down and do. And we live lives that require us to move pretty fast. And so often in times in change and transition, the symptoms that we experience make it difficult, right? How our body's experiencing, moving away from those connections. And so as we talk through thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, again, get out your pen and paper and think about your experience and try to make some connections here. So talking about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, they are always preceded by a situation. Something happened or has occurred. So for an example, while searching for a job, you get a rejection email stating you did not make it to the next round of interviews. The next thing that happens to us when we experience something is we immediately have a thought. And so it's how we think about or interpret the situation. And then, so this could be, this is hopeless. No one will ever hire me. I'll never find a new job. That's my thought once I get the rejection email. Then we have a feeling. Feelings and emotions occur as a result. And so I feel sad. I feel rejected. I feel deflated. I feel anxious. I really need this job. And then there's a behavior. I slam my computer shut. I delete the list of saved jobs, and I avoid searching for jobs for a week. So oftentimes what we see is the behavior. What we focus on, what's easier to understand is the behavior. And it doesn't always indicate what we're really thinking and feeling. And this is the important part about understanding what we're going through in change and transition, right? What are we thinking? What are we really feeling? And it's also important to name that sometimes the behavior doesn't happen immediately after the experience. Maybe we had a really difficult meeting at work where we were given some really difficult feedback about a project we've been working on, and we're told that we're being moved to a new team. Unexpectedly, we're changing the department that we're working in, and we're being moved. We can feel hopeless. We can feel sad and dejected. And it might come out in road rage. Maybe we get home and, our kids are asking us question after question after question, and we yell at them. We have these thoughts and these feelings that have sort of been sitting with us, and then we have this behavior in response to it. So it's really important to understand what we're thinking and feeling and how it's impacting how we're behaving. And so what now? As we get to understand this better, what now? So we really want to look at how to get a little bit more clarity on this. And so the first thing is to be able to practice some self-reflection. And this self-reflection piece requires some vulnerability. Again, we talked about that earlier, some uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure within ourselves, the intra, right? I have to think about what is really happening for me, and I have to get really vulnerable and honest with myself. This means we have to slow down, which for many of us, we're moving, life is fast, things are going quickly. And so we sometimes move in the urgency of a situation and we don't slow down and really think about what is our purpose? How am I able to recognize thought patterns and make connections with situations that have caused me to feel something or experience something? Have to name the fear, where that fear comes up. Fear can really get in our way of being self-reflective. This minimizing hurt is something many of us do, is we're really hurt in a situation and we try to minimize it, because it might induce some fear to have to sit and think about what we're feeling. So we try to minimize it. And so we really have to kind of unpack that. And we have to be, sort of vulnerable enough to ask for support. Again, moving away from connection. This is an opportunity to step back towards connection and to ask for support from folks, from those around us, people we're close to. Maybe the support is, a group. Maybe the support is individual therapy. Maybe the support is deciding you need to go to couples therapy. What does it look like to ask for support? And then finally, in this piece of connecting with our whole self, understanding these 5, whole wellness parts, understanding thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how to slow down and pay attention to that. We're going to talk about coping and self-care. And so coping during times of change and transition can include addressing what you can control versus what is out of your control. This is a really great activity when you're feeling flooded or overwhelmed with uncertainty. What can I control versus what is out of my control? And let me start with what I can control. Let me make that list. Let me write that down. Let me capture it. Identifying support groups and/or people. Who's my go-to person who can help me through this? Let me give them a call. Creating ritual or routine. Again, I mentioned this earlier. It creates an opportunity for some bite-sized certainty in our day. I can create this ritual or routine, carve out time for reflection. I can work on a goal. I can evaluate what I can control, and I can create a routine around it to help give me some certainty in a really uncertain time. And then working on connection, making this a priority. How do I make sure I'm prioritizing those connections with other people and not allowing myself to become too disconnected? And then coping versus numbing. So thinking about ensuring that we are leveraging coping skills, which are addressing the feelings that we're having and helping us understand them. That's a coping strategy. I'm addressing what I'm feeling. I'm addressing what is happening, what I'm thinking and experiencing. And I'm using tools to cope with them. Whereas numbing is, I want to suppress and ignore this. I'm really uncomfortable. This makes me feel really bad. I'm going to do something to numb it. And so as a part of this in self-care, and again, jot this down for you. Jot down what's coming up in relationship to your change and transition example. And think about what are some ways you can tend to yourself and take care of yourself. And so this can be intention setting. Make time to identify what are your intentions during this time. What are you needing? What are you wanting? How are you capturing this? A lot of folks that I work with come in and they're going through something very uncertain, very dysregulating, a big time of change. And I say, what do you want or need right now? And they go, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, let's start there. Let's slow down. We're going to move with some purpose. We're not going to move in that urgency. And we're going to think about, what do you want and what do you need? There are also things to do to take care of yourself. And I think these are things that lots of folks know and understand. Journaling, walking, moving, getting outside and soaking up that sun is always helpful. That vitamin D really is, helps create that dopamine, helps us feel good. Talking to our friends, doing breathing exercises, reality checks. Those reality checks are similar to what can I control and what can I not control. The reality check is when I'm going through something that's causing some dysregulation, I'm going through this big change. Let me really do a reality check of what is real and what is not. And then things like watching a funny movie. In relationship to the watching a funny movie, some of these things, these self-care things to do, got to be really careful about. Is it numbing or is it coping? I can watch a funny movie as a tool to numb, right? I want to suppress these feelings. I don't want to deal with this thing I have going on, so I'm just going to put on funny movies all day. Rather than I had a really tough day, had a really difficult conversation with my boss about leaving my job. And so in order to kind of allow myself to, I've sat in the discomfort of this conversation, I'm going to put on a funny movie to help myself decompress. And then reflection and change. What is working and going well, and what isn't working? If it's not working, are you willing to try something new? This is often a question I ask folks that I do work with. As I'm getting to know them, help me understand what's happening in your life. What are you doing? What's working? What's not? And then a question I often ask is, do you want to do something differently? Does doing something new or different feel doable for you right now? And most folks say, yeah, I'm ready. I'm here. Let's do something new. Let's explore some new ways to deal with this. And some folks say, very honestly, no, I'm not. I don't have the energy right now. I need to just talk and process. I need to work on identifying how I feel first to even be able to do something new. And that's okay too. But this is that part of that reflection, that self-reflection piece. We cannot, change something for ourselves if we can't understand what we are and aren't willing to do about it. So some other ways to find and seek support are things like individual, couples, and group therapy. These are some other alternatives and ideas. Reaching out, Eden's has lots of groups, individual therapists, and couples therapy are great ways to navigate, finding and seeking additional support. So everyone take a collective deep breath. Sit with, soak in what you're hearing, you're thinking about, making connections, hopefully, getting curious with yourself, maybe feeling some validation or some normalcy with maybe what some of the symptoms are, what your body's experiencing. And if you have any questions that are coming up, put them in the chat. We have some time now and I can answer some questions. And we can go over if anything is coming up. Again, another reminder too, as folks are thinking and putting things in the chat, if they have any questions, we have that evaluation. If you can click on the link at the top of the chat and fill that out for us, we would really appreciate it. That would be great. So I'll give a few minutes to see if folks have questions that they want to put in the chat. See one question in the chat, but I believe it might be from earlier at the beginning of the conversation. And so I apologize if I'm misinterpreting this question, and I'm going to answer it. And I'll share a little bit about how I'm reading it. So the question is, why do we go into this spiral? Are you saying we're just coping the best way we know how? These are some great questions and making some good connections. And so the meaning making I'm thinking about this is why we go into this spiral and change and transition. I'm connecting that back to a lot of those symptoms. We have different emotional reactions and responses, and the psychological and physiological responses to change often make us feel that spiral. The stress, the overwhelm, the uncertainty of it, the fear, the dread, the avoidance, all of those feelings are our emotional and physiological responses, and that can induce the spiral. And then when thinking about coping, a lot of times we're using what we know to cope the best we know how. Most of us are trying our best, right? We're trying our best to manage and to regulate those feelings. And the difficult part is sometimes we just don't know how. Sometimes we are trying things that aren't working for us, and it can be really challenging to manage and kind of get a grip of what we're feeling and what we're experiencing. And I hope that the conversation that we had tonight helped create some connections and some understanding. A lot of times, helping the spiral is just naming what we're feeling in the spiral. Because when we name it, we understand it, we can get clarity with what it's doing to us. We can think about those buckets, right, of our wellness and what's going on, and where do we need to start tending to something differently? Where can we increase some connection and some care for ourselves in order to manage that spiral? So I see a question here. What do you suggest if one has a history of confrontation being negative, especially when in stressful situations? And so when one tries to address how they feel, the thought of addressing things is stressful in and of itself. Yeah, this is a really common experience for people. When there's confrontation happening, negative confrontation, difficult, uncomfortable conversations, we often can start to feel those symptoms um, of the change and transition. We can start feeling those symptoms, the stress, the overwhelm, and we can become really dysregulated with what we're feeling and experiencing. And so, oftentimes what I will work with clients is really addressing one, what is happening? What is happening in the confrontation? So how can we reflect on, think about, use an experience that an individual has been through, because each of us might be experiencing the inability to engage because it becomes very difficult, but what we're experiencing and feeling might be different. So we first want to address what feelings are coming up. Talk about, what is that rooted in? Where did it start? What is our understanding around having difficult conversations? What does it cause for us? And then building some resiliency and some tolerance to those feelings in the session and how we have conversations, and unpack some of that in order to help better prepare us for those situations. And also normalizing some of us, whenever I have really difficult conversations, oftentimes, more likely than not, my face will turn red and my voice will shake. And it's really that physiological symptom of the stress. And that is something that I've had to really recognize and understand, is this is going to be a part of my response. And so also building up some of that resiliency of how can I tolerate and handle the situation, even when it's negative, because I can also get rooted on what's the benefit of having it. What do I want or need the outcome to be? So then again, understanding the experience and then linking that to what could be the benefit be. How do we stop rumination? Yeah, Claire, that's a great question. And that's a big question. And I think that is something that if we had kind of a statement, or this is the solution to that, that would be wonderful. But that's not the case. And so that is a question that is really specific and different to different people. And so that would be something that we would have to dig into, individually, and really understand what's causing the rumination. What does the rumination look like? Is it on thoughts? Is it on behaviors, right? And really get curious about that in order to better understand what's happening. And so I apologize, I can't give a more in-depth response to that, but that's a very individualized question. that would need a lot more questions to your question. Um, and then I see, yeah, thank you. We are such fragile beings. Sometimes we're so vulnerable, and other times we are confident and in control of our lives. Sometimes it's so easy, and other times it's so debilitating. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think I really appreciate, you all showing up and being willing to hear and be a part of this conversation, um, and to keep leaning in, because you're right. Sometimes we feel really great, and sometimes there's some uncertainty there, and making the commitment to really think about what's coming up and what are we experiencing, and how do I create opportunity to be in community and connect with others for support as I'm going through something really difficult. And I encourage each and every one of you, if you aren't already reaching out to communities of support, please do. We are here. And we're here at Eddins, there's a team of us here to support folks every day going through some difficult things. So we are a source and a resource, so please use us. We're coming to the end of our time. I want to finalize with just immense gratitude for being here, for listening, for showing up, being willing to be a part of this conversation with me. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day, wherever your time this evening takes you. Thank you all for coming.